Cop stops black woman for no reason at the airport until she pulls out her airline's top management badge. Welcome everyone to a tale of power, prejudice and poetic justice set amid the bustling chaos of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, one of the busiest transit hubs in the entire world. In the midst of loudspeaker announcements, rolling suitcases and swirling crowds, a single tense encounter unfolds between an overzealous airport cop and a poised black woman he deems out of place. Little does he know she's no ordinary traveler. She's a top executive at the very airline, dominating most of the gates around him. This is the story of how one fateful stop changes both lives forever, bringing hidden truths into the light. The clock barely showed 6:30 in the morning, yet Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport already felt like rush hour in a major city. Streams of people zigzagged across the sprawling terminal, families with sleepy children, professionals sipping coffee and clutching laptops, older couples speaking in hushed tones about their upcoming vacations. Overhead, a PAR system chimed, announcing boarding calls and gate changes. Amid this sea of travelers was Vanessa King, a tall black woman in her mid-30s whose confident stride and stylish attire commanded attention without her uttering a word. Vanessa was more than just another passenger. She was a senior operations director at Skyglide Airlines, a major commercial carrier with headquarters in multiple cities, including Atlanta. Skyglide's name adorned countless gates at Hartsfield-Jackson, and hundreds of employees wore its uniform daily. Vanessa herself rarely wore anything flashy or pinned her corporate badge on her lapel. She preferred to blend in, especially when she traveled incognito to observe the real passenger experience, unvarnished by VIP treatment. That morning, she dragged a sleek carry-on behind her, heading toward the check-in kiosks to confirm her seat on a flight to Chicago. She could have taken advantage of the employee check-in area, but she wanted the same vantage point as any regular traveler standing in line, listening to the chatter, feeling the subtle tensions and joys that filled an airport terminal. As a top-level manager, she believed first-hand observations were key to improving operational efficiency. Whether it was signage, staff courtesy, or security wait times, she wanted to see it all without special privileges. Of course, blending in wasn't always easy. Vanessa was striking tall, fit, and dressed in a sharply tailored black suit and low heels. She carried herself with the poised confidence one might expect from an airline executive. And it was exactly that quiet self-assurance that caught the attention of Officer Dean Harris, an airport police officer who had worked at Hartsfield-Jackson for almost a decade. Officer Harris had a reputation among his peers. Some thought he was dedicated and observant, while others whispered that he liked to push the envelope, particularly with travelers of color. He was notorious for his so-called instincts, which, in practice, seemed to single out people who fit his vague idea of suspicious. This approach had led to a few complaints, but none serious enough to prompt an official review. Harris had the protection of a strong union, and most travelers, once they were let go, were too busy to press charges or file formal grievances. So, that morning, as he stood by a security checkpoint scanning the crowd, his gaze zeroed in on Vanessa. She didn't seem hurried. She wasn't fumbling with her phone or checking a boarding pass in that anxious way typical travelers do. Instead, she paused to exchange a few words with a ticketing agent, offering a friendly smile and a polite nod. That moment of ease made Harris suspicious, irrationally so. He shadowed Vanessa from a distance, waiting for a moment to intervene. His gut told him there must be something off about her, though he couldn't articulate why. Maybe it was the fact that she carried only a single piece of luggage for a business trip. Maybe it was the upright confidence in her stance that some individuals interpret as arrogance. Whatever the reason, Harris decided to follow her to the next point, the security line. Vanessa, meanwhile, ambled calmly. She'd deliberately arrived early to observe the usual morning queue. She mentally noted how quickly the line moved, how staff directed travelers to different lanes, and how TSA agents interacted with flyers. She caught small details: a passenger losing her ID, another complaining about TSA removing extra water bottles. Those small interactions told a bigger story about the airport's daily flow and might guide her next recommendations in a corporate boardroom about resource allocation. When it was her turn, she handed over her ID and boarding pass to the TSA agent, who greeted her courteously and waved her through. She slipped off her shoes, placed her electronics in separate bins, and stepped into the body scanner. Seconds later, she was cleared. No alarms or anomalies. She gathered her things, ready to head to her gate for a quick coffee before the flight. That was the moment Officer Harris made his move. Approaching from the side, he spoke loudly enough for nearby travelers to hear. "Excuse me, ma'am. I need you to step over here for additional screening." Vanessa paused, startled. She glanced at the line of passengers behind her, already feeling eyes on her. "Is there an issue?" she asked politely. "Random check," Harris said curtly. "Just step aside, please." A flush of annoyance rose in Vanessa, but she reminded herself that random checks, while sometimes irritating, were part of security protocol if done genuinely. She nodded and followed him to a small, roped-off area adjacent to the main checkpoint. "Of course," she said, handing him her ID again. "But I'd appreciate knowing what triggered this." Harris didn't answer directly. Instead, he looked over her driver's license, scanning it with a critical eye, then meeting her gaze with a tight-lipped frown. "Where are you traveling from, Miss King?" She raised an eyebrow. "From here, Atlanta, to Chicago. And the purpose of your travel?" "Business." He flicked his eyes to her carry-on. "Got any items in there that could be dangerous or restricted?" "None whatsoever." Her voice remained calm, though inside she was growing uneasy. This line of questioning felt more like an interrogation than a routine check. She'd been through airport security 1,000 times and knew how random checks typically proceeded. Rarely did they come with such a pointed line of questioning about the traveler's intentions. Harris turned to rummage through her bag, rifling past a folded blazer, some paperwork, and a laptop. No contraband, of course. He spent an inordinate amount of time flipping through the pages of a folder that contained spreadsheets and flight performance data. Vanessa forced herself to remain composed, not wanting to escalate the scene. Passers-by were already watching with curiosity. Finally, finding nothing suspicious, Harris zipped the bag shut. But he didn't let her go. "Do you have any official ID besides your driver's license?" he asked. Vanessa froze for a moment, reading the subtext. If she pulled out her corporate ID, it would reveal that she was a high-ranking executive at Skyglide Airlines. She typically reserved that ID for official matters, boarding corporate jets, visiting restricted airline offices, or representing the company in meetings. But the more Harris pressed, the more she suspected he wanted to keep her off balance. She decided not to show her airline badge yet, suspecting that once he saw her rank, the dynamic might shift drastically. Instead, she said, "My passport is at home. My driver's license is perfectly valid. Is there a problem, officer?" He stared her down, arms folded. Silence draped the space for a few beats. "All right, ma'am," he said finally, voice dripping with suspicion. "You can go for now." Vanessa nodded, tension churning in her stomach as she reclaimed her bag. A small crowd that had formed dispersed. She walked away, hearing the beep-beep of the next passenger's items going through the scanner. But the taste of the encounter lingered. Why had Harris singled her out? And was this an isolated incident or something bigger? She was about to find out that it was more than a harmless inconvenience. This was just the first spark of a conflict that would rage through the halls of the airport, unveiling deeper issues in its wake. And the officer who tried to intimidate her had no idea how high her influence soared. Vanessa found her gate and settled into one of the leather seats along the wall, letting her pulse return to normal after the jarring encounter with Officer Harris. A wave of disbelief washed over her. She'd never expected to be stopped so abruptly, with no explanation, at the very airport where her airline was a major tenant. While random checks were routine, the tone and manner of Harris's questioning had left a bitter aftertaste. Pulling out her phone, she checked emails and responded to a few urgent messages regarding Skyglide's operational updates in Chicago. Yet, her thoughts kept drifting back to Harris's cold stare. Should she file a complaint? She understood the complexities of airport security protocols. As an executive, she also knew the negative press that could follow if a passenger, especially a person of color, claimed unfair treatment without solid evidence. She needed more than just her gut feeling. A text popped up from her close friend and colleague, Tori Shields, who worked in Skyglide's corporate communications department. Tori, safe travels, V. Heard you're heading to OARD. Check in with me if you need anything. Vanessa thought about replying with a casual all good, but reconsidered. She typed, Vanessa, random question. Have we had any passenger complaints about discriminatory security checks at ATL lately? A few minutes later, Tori responded, Tori, nothing official. Why do you ask? Something happened. Vanessa, might be nothing. An officer stopped me for no apparent reason, just checking if there's a pattern. Tori's next text came quickly. Tori, I'll poke around quietly. Keep me updated. Vanessa put her phone away, glancing around the gate area. She spotted a father entertaining his toddler with a stuffed airplane, a trio of college students comparing notes on where to eat in Chicago, and an older woman nervously juggling her boarding pass and ID. Life in the airport pressed on, oblivious to her nagging sense that something was off. She tried to focus on the next steps of her day, landing in Chicago, heading to a meeting on lounge renovations, then a dinner with a business partner. But the moment she boarded the plane and settled into her seat, her phone buzzed again, this time from an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but a hunch made her swipe to answer. Hello, she said softly, as flight attendants instructed passengers to stow carry-ons. A muffled voice came through. Miss King? This is Manny Cook from the TSA local office. Vanessa's eyebrows shot up. Oh yes? How did you get my number? A brief hesitation. I recognized you at the checkpoint. I used to work with your company's security liaison on a few projects. I asked around for your contact because I wanted to apologize for what happened earlier. Vanessa's surprise deepened. Apologize? You mean the extra screening? Yes, ma'am. Officer Harris is, well, he's been flagged before for how he stops travelers. This is not an official call, just me reaching out. I respect you and your airline, and it bothered me to see you singled out. A swirl of conflicting emotions rose in Vanessa. She lowered her voice to avoid other passengers overhearing. I appreciate the gesture, Manny, but I'm not sure what I can do with that information, Manny sighed. Honestly, I'm worried. Harris has a track record of questionable stops, but he's never faced discipline because he's good at covering himself by citing suspicious behavior. Some co-workers suspect it's more about targeting certain kinds of travelers. If you were just a random passenger, you'd probably never hear from me. But you have influence. I thought you should know. Vanessa's heart pounded. She thanked Manny and hung up, her mind whirring with the implications. If Manny was correct, Officer Harris's random checks were anything but. If he was profiling passengers based on race or other biases, that spelled a serious problem. Not only was it unethical, but it could open the airport and the airline to lawsuits, negative PR, and more. But Manny's call also hinted at something else: potential allies inside the system who were tired of looking the other way. Her flight took off, and she spent most of the journey scribbling notes on a notepad. She listed possible steps. 1. Quietly gather more information about Harris's stops. 2. See if Tory can confirm other complaints or rumors. 3. If a pattern emerges, escalate to airport management. 4. Decide whether to use her position at Skyglide to push for accountability. By the time the aircraft descended into Chicago, Vanessa had formed a rough plan. She'd begin by documenting everything about her own experience, Manny's call, and any anecdotal evidence from staff. Then she'd share her concerns privately with a select few at Skyglide, especially Tory, who could manage internal communications if this story went public. Meanwhile, back in Atlanta, Officer Harris roamed the terminals with a mix of satisfaction and unease. Yes, he'd singled out that woman, but something about her lingered in his mind. She was composed, unflappable, and her name, Vanessa King, rang a bell. He even suspected she might hold a significant position at that airline with all the gates around him, but he refused to dwell too long on the thought. After all, no matter who she was, in his mind, he was just doing his job, yet a nagging worry settled in the pit of his stomach. He'd never quite stopped a passenger who exuded such quiet authority, and he'd definitely never had a reason to reflect on whether his routine of suspicious behavior stops might be too subjective. Harris prided himself on being vigilant, but deep down, perhaps he knew his vigilance had blurred into profiling. As he strolled past the shops and restaurants in Concourse B, he overheard two gate agents from Skyglide discussing an upcoming operational review. They mentioned how Miss King would be leading a new training workshop for ground staff to improve passenger relations. Harris paused, eavesdropping. Could it be the same Miss King? He shook his head and continued walking, telling himself it was mere coincidence. Still, the seed was planted. His anxiety heightened. If that Miss King were indeed the woman he'd singled out, she might have the power to make trouble for him. He told himself he'd done nothing wrong, merely performed an additional screening. But he also recalled the borderline hostile tone he'd taken with her. If she filed a complaint, maybe the airline could pressure the airport to investigate. The thought made him scowl. He decided he'd act as if nothing happened. Business as usual. After all, no single passenger, even one with some status, would have the clout to get him in serious trouble, right? Vanessa spent a hectic 2 days in Chicago. Between negotiation sessions with airport officials and discussing lounge renovations for Skyglide, she found spare moments to trade texts with Tory, who was discreetly digging into the matter. Tory uncovered a few internal rumors, nothing official, about travelers who felt singled out by an ATL airport cop, but never escalated their grievances. Additionally, Manny Cook followed up, sending Vanessa an email with a few notes unofficially gathered on Officer Harris's record, multiple passenger stops that yielded no contraband or suspicious items, a pattern of targeting travelers with certain demographics, and some scathing remarks from colleagues who questioned his methods. Manny emphasized that he couldn't attach his name to any official complaint for fear of workplace repercussions, but he wanted the truth known. Vanessa stared at the data on her laptop in her Chicago hotel room, alarmed. If Harris was systematically targeting passengers of color, the ramifications were massive. As an airline executive, she knew well the potential PR disaster. As a black woman, she felt a personal sense of injustice. This was more than just her professional duty. It was about ensuring travelers wouldn't face the same humiliating experience she did. On her last night in Chicago, she formulated a plan. 1. Return to Atlanta. 2. Quietly confront the airport security administration with the evidence. 3. If they drag their feet, escalate within Skyglide's leadership, possibly involving legal counsel. 4. Only go public if absolutely necessary to preserve the airport's and airline's reputation. Of course, she had no idea that events would soon accelerate, forcing her hand faster than she imagined. For lurking in the wings was a chain of events that would push Officer Harris to reveal his hand in a very public way, paving the path for his own undoing. Vanessa's flight back to Atlanta landed late on a Wednesday evening. She was exhausted from back-to-back meetings, but her mind buzzed with the knowledge she'd gathered about Officer Harris. Clutching her carry-on, she stepped off the plane, scanning the crowded terminal for any sign of the uniformed cop. Part of her hoped she'd see him again to confirm her suspicions or perhaps gauge his reaction. Another part of her dreaded a confrontation. She made her way to the baggage claim, deciding she'd arrange a meeting first thing in the morning with Harold Dennis, Skyglide's Vice President of Corporate Security. Harold was a level-headed man who had worked both in airline security and local law enforcement. If anyone understood how to navigate complaints about an airport cop, it would be him. She typed a quick email from her phone while waiting by the carousel. Harold, urgent matter. Need to discuss an officer at ATL who's overstepping boundaries. Are you free tomorrow? A beep indicated an immediate response. Come by at 9 a.m. Let's sort it out. Vanessa breathed a sigh of relief. At least the wheels were in motion. After grabbing her bag, she headed for the airport exit. A wave of humidity hit her. It was Atlanta in mid-spring, and even at night, the air felt thick. She climbed into a rideshare and mentally rehearsed how she'd present the case. Manny's intel, the rumored passenger complaints, her personal experience, and Tori's subtle background checks. She'd let Harold decide how to escalate it up the chain. That same evening, Officer Harris sat at a desk in a cramped airport police office, finishing up paperwork for the day. The overhead fluorescent light buzzed softly. He was typing up a summary of his day's activities, marking down the random checks he'd performed. He frowned at the memory of one particular passenger, a middle-aged Latina woman he'd pulled aside for acting nervous. She was traveling with 2 children, and it turned out she was simply anxious about missing her connecting flight. Harris had found no contraband. He jotted a few words released after verifying ID, no further action, and that was that. The door swung open, and a fellow officer, Angela Lee, stepped in. She paused, noticing him. Late night, huh? He shrugged without looking up. Got to finish these logs. Angela nodded, leaning against a filing cabinet. Heard some talk. Remember that woman you stopped a couple of days ago? The one named Vanessa King? Harris stiffened, glancing up. Yeah, what about her? Word is, she's pretty high up at Skyglide, Angela said gently. Might be trouble if she decides to file a complaint. Just a heads up. His jaw tightened. I followed protocol. She looked suspicious. Angela sighed, as though she'd heard that line before. I just don't want to see you in hot water again. She can do what she wants, he retorted, shutting his laptop with a snap. I'm not going to be intimidated by some corporate big shot. We still have a job to do. Angela nodded slowly, left unsaid that the job entailed professional conduct and impartiality qualities. Harris seemed to interpret in his own skewed way. She gave him a subdued goodnight and left him stewing in the half-lit office. Tension crackled in the air as he realized that his suspicion about her status was correct. Now, the question was, how far would she push it? Morning arrived, and Vanessa hurried through the corporate offices of Skyglide, located in a building adjacent to the main terminal. She nodded greetings at staff, but kept her focus on the appointment with Harold Dennis. Her phone chimed an incoming text from Tori. Let me know how it goes. I'm bracing for the next steps. Vanessa typed back a quick thumbs up. When she entered Harold's office, she found him reviewing security charts on a widescreen monitor. He was a tall man in his 50s with a courteous demeanor, known for bridging the gap between corporate suits and the gritty realities of airport policing. Gesturing for her to sit, he closed the charts and gave her his full attention. "All right, Vanessa," he said. "Fill me in." She recounted the entire experience, from Harris's abrupt stop to Manny's confidential phone call to the rumors and the partial data on passenger stops. As she spoke, Harold's expression darkened. He tapped a pen against a legal pad, scribbling occasional notes. "This is concerning," Harold muttered. "We rely on the airport police force for synergy. If one officer's abusing authority, it creates mistrust among passengers, and that affects us." Vanessa nodded. "Precisely. I'm worried about the brand reputation, but also about travelers' rights. If he's specifically targeting people of color, we can't turn a blind eye." Harold sighed. "No, we can't. Next step is an internal approach. I have connections with the airport's head of security, Captain Robertson. She's fair, but tough. We'll request a meeting to present these concerns." However, he paused. "We need as much concrete evidence as possible. Do we have formal complaints from passengers?" "Not yet," Vanessa admitted, but Manny Cook from TSA hinted that multiple such stops were suspicious. The problem is, Manny's reluctant to speak on record. People fear retaliation. Harold frowned. "Understandable. Let's see what can be done. Meanwhile, I'll share your account with Captain Robertson, and we'll see if there's any existing file on Harris." That might open an official investigation. Vanessa agreed, feeling a wave of relief. She'd expected to be told to keep it quiet, but Harold seemed genuinely invested in resolution. They planned to meet again the following day, hoping to schedule a conference call with Captain Robertson. That afternoon, circumstances forced Vanessa back into the main terminal to oversee a minor issue with an arriving international flight, a mechanical delay that needed quick corporate sign-off for maintenance checks. As she walked through Concourse D, reviewing messages on her phone, she suddenly heard someone call her name from behind. "Miss King." She turned to see Manny Cook, the TSA officer who'd called her. He approached with a cautious glance around, as if worried someone might see them talking. "I wasn't sure you'd be here," he said quietly, "but I wanted to let you know. I think Harris found out. I contacted you." He was asking around, trying to see who might have told you about his track record. Alarm flickered in Vanessa's eyes. "What does that mean?" "I'm not certain," Manny replied, voice low. "But just be careful. He's rattled, and when he's rattled, he can do dumb things to protect himself." Vanessa felt her stomach tighten. She'd hoped to approach the situation diplomatically, with enough evidence that Harris would face an investigation. The last thing she wanted was a personal vendetta from an officer who already showed questionable judgment. She thanked Manny for the warning and watched him vanish into the crowd. She was still mulling over Manny's words when her phone rang. It was Harold, sounding urgent. "Vanessa, I just spoke with Captain Robertson. She's willing to meet tomorrow morning, but she wants to keep it informal at first. I think we might be onto something here. She apparently has her own concerns about Harris. If we can present enough data, we might see real action." Vanessa's spirits lifted, though Manny's warning lingered like a shadow. "Got it," she said. "Let's finalize our documents and go in prepared." Little did she know, events would soon spiral out of control, and her next confrontation with Harris would be anything but private. Officer Harris, for his part, was on edge. He'd picked up rumors that the woman he stopped was high up at Skyglide, possibly lodging complaints. Fear morphed into anger, fueling his belief that people were conspiring to undermine him. One of his close colleagues tried to calm him down. "If you followed protocol, you'll be fine." But in Harris's mind, protocol was whatever he decided it was. His simmering resentment found an outlet, doubling down on the same harsh tactics that brought him into question in the first place. Over the next 24 hours, he'd questioned 2 more passengers with minimal cause, drawing uneasy glances from fellow officers. The tension was like a coiled spring, ready to snap. By the time the next morning dawned, Vanessa was preparing to meet Captain Robertson with Harold. She hoped to speak calmly, present the facts, and pave the way for an investigation. She had no idea that fate, or perhaps the officer's own reckless choices, would soon bring them face to face again in the most dramatic way possible, upending the quiet approach and forcing a very public reckoning. Early the next day, Vanessa made her way to an unremarkable administrative block adjacent to the airport. She carried a neat folder labeled confidential, containing bullet-pointed notes, timestamps of her interaction with Harris, Manny's anonymized data, and Tori's preliminary research on rumored passenger incidents. She met Harold outside the dull grey building. He gave her a reassuring nod, and they stepped into a cramped elevator that took them to Captain Veronica Robertson's office on the 3rd floor. Captain Robertson, head of the airport's Internal Security Administration, welcomed them with a professional smile. She was a short, middle-aged woman with sharp eyes that spoke of years in law enforcement. A second person, Lieutenant Marcus Flynn, sat at a table, presumably to take notes. "So," Robertson began once they were seated, "I hear there's a concern about one of our officers, Dean Harris." Vanessa swallowed, choosing her words carefully. "Yes, ma'am. I had a direct encounter with him last week. Let's just say the stop was unwarranted. After some digging, I've come across repeated allegations of targeting travelers without cause, especially those of minority backgrounds." She passed the confidential folder across the desk. Robertson flipped through it, her features growing stern. Lieutenant Flynn hovered behind her, skimming pages and raising an eyebrow. It took a few minutes, during which Harold added context about Manny's phone call and the unconfirmed pattern of complaints. Captain Robertson finally closed the folder, exhaling. "I won't lie to you, we've had murmurs about Harris before, but everything was always anecdotal, and the union is strong. He's never faced formal charges of misconduct." Her expression hardened. "But if this is as comprehensive as it looks, we have enough to initiate an internal review." Harold nodded. "Skyglide just wants fairness. We can't ignore it if an airport cop is profiling our passengers. It undermines trust in the entire travel experience." Robertson agreed and promised to keep them updated. She explained the next steps, gathering official statements, analyzing Harris's stop records, and possibly conducting interviews with other officers. "We'll do this by the book," she said. "I won't let personal biases overshadow due process, but if he's been abusing his power, we'll act." Vanessa left the building feeling an odd mix of relief and anxiety. She was glad to have found an ally in Robertson, yet worried about how Harris might react once he realized an official internal review was looming. Strolling back toward the main terminal with Harold, she parted ways at a corridor that linked to the Skyglide offices. She planned to head to a meeting about new pilot training modules, feeling hopeful that the system might address Harris appropriately. But no one could anticipate the explosive event about to unfold in Concourse C. Officer Dean Harris was already on edge. That morning, he'd noticed Captain Robertson's assistant rummaging through some files in the security office. Then he saw glimpses of co-workers casting furtive looks his way. He surmised that an investigation was in the works. Fear turned into resentment, and it found a convenient outlet when he caught sight of a familiar figure rounding a corner near Concourse C, none other than Vanessa King. Vanessa had a bit of spare time before her next meeting, so she decided to walk a route used by many connecting passengers, just to see how signage and flow could be improved. She wasn't looking for trouble, but trouble was looking for her. As she paused to study a directional sign, Harris appeared at her side, his voice blunt and commanding. "Monsieur A.M., we need to talk." Her heart skipped a beat. Slowly she turned. "Officer Harris," she said, striving for composure. "Is there an issue?" His gaze burned with thinly veiled anger. "I need to see your ID again, corporate or otherwise. Right now." Vanessa's stomach knotted. She knew this wasn't a routine security check. It felt more like intimidation. The corridor was somewhat busy, with passengers scurrying past. Though no immediate authority figure seemed present, she glanced around, aware that a public scene could escalate quickly. Still, she refused to show fear. "Officer, I'm just walking from one part of the terminal to another. I haven't gone through any secured checkpoint. What's the basis for this?" Harris's jaw clenched. "I have reason to believe you may be interfering with airport procedures. We got a tip someone matching your description is coordinating disruptions." "What?" Vanessa's eyes widened in disbelief. "That's nonsense. I work for Skyglide. I'm just going about my business." He stepped closer, voice dropping so no one else could hear. "Don't play dumb. I know you're behind some complaint. You think you can ruin my career? I'm not letting you get away with it." She inhaled sharply, connecting the dots. He'd found out about the internal review. Her mind raced. Should she comply or stand her ground? She pictured him forcibly detaining her, the spectacle that would create. "Enough is enough," she thought. "Officer Harris," she said quietly, "I have every right to move freely here. If you have a legitimate concern, call your supervisor. Otherwise, let me pass." He glared at her, one hand drifting near his belt where his radio and cuffs were attached. "I'll do what I need to do." Passengers started to notice, slowing to watch. Vanessa felt her pulse thunder in her ears. "Then you leave me no choice," she said, steeling herself. Reaching into her purse, she pulled out the ID badge that displayed her name, photograph, and title, Vanessa King, Senior Operations Director, Skyglide Airlines. The effect was immediate. Gasps came from a couple of onlookers. One or two recognized the brand, whispering among themselves. Harris stared at the badge, jaw slack for a moment, then tried to regain composure. "I don't care who you are," he stammered. "You're under suspicion." Vanessa felt her anger surge. Under suspicion for what? Being a black woman in a business suit? "If you think my job title is going to stop me from filing a formal complaint about your behavior, you're mistaken." He bristled, stepping forward as if to physically stop her from walking away. By now, the tension had drawn a small crowd. Several travelers fumbled for phones, uncertain whether to film. One flight attendant recognized Vanessa from internal corporate events and quickly stepped closer, concern etched on her face. "Back off, people. This is a security matter," Harris barked, forcing them to step away. Then, turning back to Vanessa, he spat. "You think your fancy airline badge puts you above the law?" She met his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "No, but it means I know the law and your department's procedures. You have no grounds to detain me." A flicker of panic danced in his eyes, quickly replaced by defiance. "You want me fired, don't you?" he hissed. "Well, maybe I'll act first." He reached for his radio as though about to call in some fabricated charge. Suddenly, a voice boomed from behind. "Officer Harris, stand down." The crowd parted to reveal Captain Robertson and Lieutenant Flynn, both looking furious. They must have been alerted by a bystander or recognized the scuffle. Robertson strode forward, nodding briskly at Vanessa before turning her glare on Harris. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she snapped. He froze, color draining from his face. "Captain, I know exactly what you were doing," Robertson interrupted. "We received multiple reports about you harassing Miss King. Do you realize we have an active investigation into your conduct?" his mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The circle of onlookers only grew. More phone cameras were pointed at them now. Robertson jerked her head toward Flynn, who promptly stepped forward to take Harris's badge and his airport access ID from his belt clip. "You're relieved of duty pending a disciplinary hearing," Robertson said icily. "We'll be reviewing your actions both here and your past stops. And from what I see, it doesn't look good." "No, wait, Captain, you can't," Harris blustered, but Flynn had already ushered him aside. The crowd murmured. Some passengers clapped softly, uncertain but relieved. Vanessa stood there, adrenaline pounding, uncertain whether to cry in frustration or breathe a sigh of relief. She locked eyes with Captain Robertson, who nodded apologetically. "I'm sorry, Miss King. Please come with me. Let's get you out of this commotion and record your statement." Vanessa nodded, swallowing hard. With cameras still rolling, she followed Robertson away from the gawking throng, her mind reeling from the public meltdown that had just unfolded. The chain of events had escalated far beyond the quiet approach she'd planned. Now, there was no doubt that Harris would face the consequences of his aggressive, unjust tactics. The question was, how deep would those consequences run? And would it spark real change within the airport's security protocols? Within an hour of that confrontation, the story began to spread around Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport like wildfire. Terminal gossip traveled fast, fueled by travelers who had witnessed the scene or caught it on camera. A few short videos popped up on social media, capturing the tense moment where Vanessa displayed her airline badge and Captain Robertson stormed in to discipline Harris. By midday, news of Harris's suspension reached every corner of the airport staff. Some were stunned. He had always seemed so entrenched in his ways, seemingly untouchable. Others felt vindicated. They'd suspected for years that he was profiling certain travelers unfairly, but no one had mustered the courage or the clout to challenge him effectively. Whispers floated that if he could threaten a senior airline executive like Vanessa, he must have been confident no one would question him. For Vanessa, the ordeal was equal parts relief and emotional exhaustion. She'd been escorted to a small administrative office, where she spent the better part of the morning giving a detailed statement to Captain Robertson and an internal affairs investigator. Harold joined later, providing background about Manny Cook's testimonies and the rumored passenger complaints. The evidence was no longer just a folder of alleged incidents now. It had a very public altercation to support it. Throughout the afternoon, Vanessa fielded messages of concern from Tori, Manny, and even top executives at Skyglide. She assured them she was fine. She just wanted to ensure no passenger ever experienced such harassment again. Meanwhile, the gravity of her position sank in. By exposing Harris, she had inadvertently become the face of a deeper issue. The possibility of media coverage loomed. Large airport controversies often went national fast. Captain Robertson wasted no time. That very evening, she issued an internal memo to the airport security team, stating that Officer Dean Harris was suspended pending a disciplinary review. The memo alluded to substantiated allegations of misconduct, including unauthorized stops and apparent targeting based on personal biases. It didn't mention Vanessa by name, but emphasized that the airport was taking these matters seriously. Immediately, the police union representing Harris lashed back, demanding due process. They insisted that any final decision required a formal hearing. The result was an urgent scheduling of an internal tribunal, a kind of fact-finding committee that would determine whether to fire Harris or, in the unlikely event he was cleared, reinstate him. Vanessa received official notice from airport administration. Her testimony would be required. The thought made her uneasy. She disliked the spotlight, and the hearing promised to be high-stakes drama. But now that events had escalated, she felt obligated to see it through. Outside the official channels, there was an undercurrent of both support and tension. Some staffers, especially those from minority backgrounds, felt a rush of validation that their concerns might finally be heard. Manny texted Vanessa, "Hearing you speak up gave me courage. If they call me in, I'll testify about his track record. No more fear." Others, however, resented the turmoil. A small group of officers claimed that the sudden crackdown on Harris was a politically correct overreaction. They insisted he was only doing his job, ignoring the mounting evidence that suggested otherwise. The rumor mill even suggested that some union members might try to discredit Vanessa or Manny, painting them as troublemakers. Vanessa braced herself for the possibility of personal attacks. Back in Skyglide's corporate offices, the company's top brass were fully briefed on the situation. Vanessa sat in a boardroom with Tory Harold and a few other executives, detailing the meltdown at Concourse C and the next steps in the official inquiry. "Vanessa," said Alex Wang, Skyglide's chief operations officer, "we're behind you. This is bigger than just your personal experience. We can't allow any passenger to be humiliated or singled out unfairly, especially if race is a factor. From a moral standpoint, we must support a fair investigation. From a business standpoint, we can't afford to let it go unanswered." She nodded, grateful for the support. Tory chimed in, "Media sniffers are picking up on this. We've had a few requests for comment from local stations. So far, we've responded with a neutral statement about cooperating with the airport's investigation. But if this escalates, we might need you to speak out, or at least someone from our side." Vanessa grimaced. She'd never wanted to become a public figure in a controversy, but maybe shining a light was necessary. "All right, let's keep it measured. I'll do whatever is best for the airline and for justice in this matter," she said. That evening, Vanessa finally returned to her apartment, a minimalist space downtown with large windows overlooking the skyline. She sank into her sofa, the day's tension settling into her bones. Even after a moral victory, she felt drained. She sipped a cup of chamomile tea, letting her mind wander. A part of her still felt unsettled. Would the union manage to spin the narrative? Would they claim she provoked Harris? And what about Manny's safety, or Naomi's, the TSA officer Manny had mentioned as also having concerns? She worried that people who spoke out could face retaliation, yet the alternative, staying silent, was worse. Her phone buzzed. It was a new message from Manny. "I told them I'd testify at the hearing if needed. Not sure how it'll go, but I'm in." She typed back a thank you, relieved that Manny's courage might reinforce her case. As she prepared for bed, she caught her reflection in a mirror, recalling how her calm facade had masked a storm of anger and fear during the confrontation with Harris. She felt a surge of pride in herself for standing up, but also an ache for the countless travelers who couldn't flash a corporate badge to defend themselves. If her position could push for systemic change, then all the stress was worthwhile. Over the next week, internal affairs worked at lightning speed, partly because the public's interest grew by the day. Snippets of the confrontation video circulated online. A few news articles surfaced, quoting anonymous airport sources about how a Skyglide executive was harassed. The airport administration, likely wanting to avoid a full-blown PR disaster, fast-tracked the hearing date. Official subpoenas or notices went out to potential witnesses, including Manny, and possibly other travelers with past complaints. Meanwhile, Tory prepared statements in case the press approached Vanessa or the airline for official comment. Harold quietly gathered more evidence from TSA logs, showing how disproportionately often Harris flagged travelers of color. One afternoon, Manny dropped by Vanessa's office with a sheepish grin. "Hey, I wanted to thank you in person," he said. "Because of your stance, the airport's actually talking about better oversight for random checks." I've been hoping for that for years. Vanessa offered a humble smile. Glad to hear it. Let's just hope the hearing seals the deal. Across the concourse, behind closed doors, Harris and his union representative were busy constructing a defense. They planned to claim he'd received tips about suspicious individuals matching certain descriptions, or that passengers exhibited behavior consistent with smuggling. The union lawyer advised him to keep quiet publicly, hoping to catch the investigators off guard with invented rationales. But the footage from Concourse C was too damning footage that showed him confronting Vanessa with zero mention of any tip. The hush among his colleagues suggested that few believed him anymore. Late on a Friday afternoon, Captain Robertson's office sent out a memo confirming the hearing date, Wednesday morning, 9 a.m., in a secure meeting room at the airport. The hearing would determine whether Harris would be fired and whether the case would be referred to external authorities for potential civil rights violations. Vanessa took a long breath as she read the email. The date was set. In just a handful of days, everything would come to a head. She could almost feel the entire airport holding its breath, anticipating the outcome. Some saw it as justice in the making, others feared a messy, legal standoff. In the quiet hours before that final showdown, Vanessa wrestled with a sense of responsibility heavier than any she'd felt in her professional life. Yes, she was used to making high-stakes decisions about airline routes, budgets, and staff. But this was different. This was about standing up to discrimination and exposing an officer who had, for too long, hidden behind a badge. As she turned off her office lights that evening, she knew the next week might change Hartsfield-Jackson Airport in ways no one could have predicted. Wednesday arrived with a tense undercurrent at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Behind the scenes, a secure administrative room was set up for the disciplinary hearing against Officer Dean Harris. Vanessa, accompanied by Harold Torrey and a Skyglide legal advisor, sat quietly near the front. Nearby, Manny waited to testify. On the opposite side, Harris appeared with his union lawyer, unease evident in his stiff posture. Captain Veronica Robertson led the proceedings alongside two senior officials. She opened by summarizing the case. Multiple claims of unwarranted stops, targeting of minority travelers, and an altercation with a Skyglide executive. Harris's lawyer first attempted to justify his actions, citing nebulous security threats. Yet no supporting evidence emerged. When Manny testified, he spoke of observing Harris's repeated pattern, stops that led nowhere, aimed predominantly at people of color. He provided specific dates and terminals, refuting the notion of random coincidence. Under cross-examination, Manny remained calm, insisting he merely wanted fair treatment for passengers. Then it was Vanessa's turn. She recounted her first encounter at the checkpoint where Harris singled her out with zero credible explanation, and the final confrontation in Concourse C. She described his aggressive tone, the fabricated suspicion, and the moment she revealed her Skyglide badge. Harris's lawyer tried to paint her as seeking revenge, but Vanessa coolly explained her motive, protecting travelers from discriminatory practices. Finally, Harris rose to defend himself. Claiming a decade of service, he accused Vanessa of using her influence to undermine him. He offered vague references to intelligence tips, but could not produce a single documented case. The panel pressed him for concrete examples, and none were forthcoming. His words rang hollow. After a short recess for deliberation, Captain Robertson announced the verdict. Officer Harris was found guilty of gross misconduct. He was terminated immediately, and the airport would forward the case to federal authorities to investigate possible civil rights violations. Harris's face fell, his union lawyer grimly acknowledging there was little room for appeal. Vanessa felt relief flood through her. The swirling tension of weeks condensed into this moment, proof that her stand against bias could spark meaningful consequences. She accepted Captain Robertson's apologies on behalf of the Security Administration, acknowledging the complexity of firing a longtime officer. Manny expressed his gratitude too, relieved that speaking up had mattered. Outside the hearing room, Tori quietly informed Vanessa that media outlets were inquiring about the outcome. As a result, Skyglide planned a measured statement emphasizing fairness in security practices. Vanessa realized this saga extended beyond her personal vindication. Other travelers, especially those lacking her corporate influence, might finally see improvements. In the days that followed, the airport implemented stricter oversight on secondary screenings. Captain Robertson promised ongoing reforms to prevent future abuses of power. Vanessa collaborated with Manny on suggestions for better documentation whenever an officer flagged a passenger. It was a hopeful step toward making the airport safer and more equitable. Standing by a window overlooking the busy tarmac, Vanessa reflected on how easily Harris might have continued if no one with her clout had intervened. Though she disliked the public attention, she felt a profound sense of responsibility fulfilled. When she returned to her office, Tori handed her a final memo. News of Harris's official firing was spreading, accompanied by talk of better training programs and new complaint channels. A gentle smile tugged at Vanessa's lips. The change wasn't instant or absolute, but a corner had been turned. She'd confronted prejudice and forced the system to address it. For every passenger who'd once felt powerless, that victory would echo. And in the relentless movement of airplanes and travelers, there was a renewed sense that justice had found its way even in the midst of airport chaos. Thank you for staying until the end of this gripping journey set in the bustling terminals of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, a place where one fateful encounter exposed an officer's unchecked bias. We watched Vanessa King, a high-level executive with Skyglide Airlines, transform from a quietly observant traveler into a steadfast champion for passengers' rights, standing toe-to-toe with prejudice and ultimately emerging victorious. Her calm determination not only ended Officer Harris's reign of unwarranted stops, but also sparked new conversations about accountability and fair treatment for every traveler. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and share it so others can witness how courage can topple even the most entrenched injustices. Most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about resilience, redemption, and real-life lessons. Don't forget to hit that notification bell to stay updated. Together, let's keep pushing for fairness and justice, one story at a time.